You're watching teleSUR English. I'm Katrina Goss. We continue with our live coverage of the high-level debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. We now go live to the statements of the representative of Nicaragua.
Brother Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, heads of delegation. We continue to live at a time of a pandemic which is impacting all of humanity, especially developing countries. These are times which test the strength, the faith, and the solidarity of all humanity as we grapple with enormous challenges. We would like to convey solidarity and condolences from our comrade, President of Nicaragua, Comandante Daniel Ortega Saavedra, and his companion, the Vice President Rosario Murillo, to the families of the entire world who have suffered the serious consequences of COVID-19 and who have lost loved ones. This worldwide health crisis continues to undermine our efforts to overcome problems and existing challenges such as poverty, hunger, malnutrition, inequality, unemployment, climate change, all produced by the system of capitalist exploitation, which is irrational and oppressive. It is unacceptable that we have hoarding of COVID-19 vaccines by the developed nations, which then prevents distribution which would be fair and equitable for all, including developing countries. It's inhuman. It's necessary and fair to guarantee the transfer of technology and financial resources and to declare these vaccines as a common good for all humanity. We must continue with our spirit of fighting for humanity to grapple with and overcome the pandemic in solidarity, cooperating without conditions and with robust multilateralism to enable us to have access to vaccines and thereby prevent unequal or politicization of distribution. The pandemic impacts all countries on our Mother Earth and has clearly shown the need for the creation of a new international economic model which would be based on inclusion, equity, social justice, respectful equality among states and governments, prioritizing eradication of poverty, health as a universal right of all humanity, insisting that the resources that are used for war, aggression, and destabilization of countries be used in a humanist spirit for life, peace, security, and the progress of all peoples. We must stand together against all the challenges and calamities that affect humanity, and we must not forget the crises of the refugees as well as the pain and suffering of the migrants. Clearly, wars and interventions that have been promoted or undertaken by Western powers violate our people's sovereignty and condemn to exile millions of children, women, and vulnerable groups who suffer from the consequences of greed and avarice of the most powerful, who then seek refuge in Western countries, who violate human rights and seek protection in their discriminatory policies with cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. Also, safe, regular, and orderly migration is impeded by a lack of determination and will by the Western countries. Millions of people from developing countries who are victims of the unfair neoliberal model then migrate with the dream of finding more opportunity in developed countries where they are rejected and where their dignity and human rights are also violated. Mr. President, recently, on the 15th of September, we commemorated the 200 years anniversary of Nicaragua's first independence, as well as the Central American peoples. That is 2 centuries of fighting for sovereignty, self-determination, and independence in Nicaragua. These are victories for which we continue to struggle with conviction, perseverance, and dignity. Nicaragua is a state which is free, independent, and sovereign, and yet there are still imperial forces which undermine our development projects, which undermine our efforts to fulfill the 2030 agenda or the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, especially the goal of eradicating poverty, which is the most cruel pandemic in the world. We urgently require that the United Nations stand for peace, justice, and security, and it stand watch in order to provide comprehensive responses that benefit all of humanity, fulfilling the commitments that states undertook in the Charter of the United Nations. It is only through world responsible partnership whereby the most powerful respect the international law and the Charter of the United Nations. It is only then that it will be possible to counter the impact of other pandemics imposed by the powers which harm peace, international security, independence, the sovereignty of states, and self-determination of peoples. The reinvention of the United Nations continues to be current, as was proposed on behalf of Nicaragua, our comrade and priest, the Chancellor of Nicaragua, Miguel Escoto, during Nicaragua's presidency of the General Assembly in 2008. We reiterate our support for the position, the common position of Africa set forth in the El Zawini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration in the process of reforming the United Nations, including the Security Council. Nicaragua will continue to defend multilateralism, constructing relations based on respect, sovereign equality, solidarity, mutual cooperation, and respecting and fulfilling the principles and purpose of the United Nations Charter, which includes non-interference in internal affairs and respect of international law. By peaceful vocation, Nicaragua also stands for general disarmament, complete disarmament, and is in favor of total elimination of nuclear weapons for the benefit of all humanity. It is unacceptable that in the midst of this pandemic, weapons of mass destruction continue to be modernized and updated, thereby endangering all of humanity. It is part of the waning creation of wild capitalism that there is an insatiable appetite for accumulation at the expense of peace, international security, and human life. The hope of the planet's inhabitants is that nuclear weapons would disappear completely because they are a threat for all of humanity, including the very peoples of the countries that manufacture them and possess them. Nicaragua is a party to the Tlatelolco Treaty, whereby many years ago we committed to not allow any country in Latin America or the Caribbean to bring about the development of nuclear weapons. We welcome the entry into force of the historical treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, which for the first time prohibits the very existence, use, or threat of use of nuclear weapons, which Nicaragua ratified. Turning to Afghanistan, we would insist that peace prevail. The United States and the European countries need to act rationally and responsibly, appealing for renunciation and the stopping of the culture and practice of war. The lessons drawn in Afghanistan are clear. Neither intervention nor unilateral coercive sanctions work. They are failed policies, and the powers need to realize that only the path of peace and international law make it possible to have relationships with all peoples of the world, especially with developing nations. Nicaragua will continue to promote a culture of peace, of peaceful coexistence between sister nations, which make up the United Nations organization, and we will continue in Central America to be a factor of stability, peace, and regional security. Member states of the United Nations should continue making every effort so that the Western powers stop and desist with their bellicose policies and actions, with the use or the threat of the use of force, which then lead to more instability, more insecurity worldwide. We reiterate the quest for a desired understanding, peaceful coexistence between nations, and we must continue promoting a culture of peace, recognizing the principle of a peaceful settlement of international disputes by means offered by international law. This is why we stand for the defense of sovereignty, territorial integrity, independence, and the right to self-determination of our peoples. The illegal, unilateral, coercive measures need to cease immediately to guarantee stability, peace, and development of families, peoples, and nations. These aggressive and coercive policies of the imperial powers create obstacles, overwhelming obstacles, for the eradication of poverty and to make progress towards sustainable development. In these times of a pandemic, these measures become a crime against humanity, committed by those who impose them. For Nicaragua, they are unacceptable, and we reject them. And we reiterate our condemnation and the fact that we stand in solidarity with the more than 2 billion people who suffer under these sanctions. Nicaragua stands united with all the peoples of the world to reaffirm in a fraternal and solidary manner its rejection of the inhuman, illegal, immoral, and unfair economic, commercial, financial embargo imposed by the United States on the sister nation and government of Cuba, an extraordinary people that freed its people after a titanic battle over 60 years, which has resisted invasions, acts of terrorism, economic sanction, embargoes, and all the tools of imperialism and its destabilizing actions. We reiterate our solidarity with the sister nation of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, the Bolivarian people, and the constitutional and legitimate government of President Nicolás Maduro. Mr. President, brothers and sisters, while our peoples are working, resisting, and responding and recovering from the pandemic, we should not forget the challenges imposed by the threat of climate change and its devastating impact, especially on developing countries, which will still continue to be a challenge after we have overcome the challenge of COVID-19 and had our economies recover. To preserve and defend the right to life on our Mother Earth, it's pressing to achieve concrete results at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change in Glasgow, COP26. This is based on the principle of shared but differentiated responsibility, which is then strengthened by responsibility and fulfillment of commitments undertaken for climate justice, which becomes vital as a policy of reparations, which translates into direct and unconditional cooperation. If we allow time to pass without the developed countries fulfilling their commitments, the damage to Mother Earth will be irreversible due to global warming. And they will be historically responsible for this disaster. In short, it's important that the largest polluters and those responsible for the degradation and depredation of our planet recognize our loss and the damage, and that they contribute by helping to recover our ecosystems. It has been well demonstrated that Central America and the Caribbean is a region which is highly vulnerable to the impact of climate change. Weather and climate events are increasingly frequent and intense, as well as other climate phenomena. In November of last year, in just a 2-week period, Nicaragua was buffeted by 2 Category 5 and 4 destructive hurricanes, which affected indigenous and Afro-descended communities living on the coast, the Caribbean coast, causing significant damage to infrastructure, production, and our economy. Nicaragua acceded to the Paris Agreement in 2017 and undertook the commitment to strengthen the interests of the most vulnerable countries and align with the relevance of the policies, strategies, and instruments of the government with a view to contributing to meeting the goal of limiting global warming temperatures by 1.5 centigrade. The greatest polluters must shoulder this historic responsibility. Mr. President, we'd like to express our full solidarity and the fact that Nicaragua supports the cause and desires for self-determination, peace, and justice of the Palestinian people. Nicaragua shall not stop in calling for and supporting a solution based on two states, the State of Israel and the State of Palestine, according to the 1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital, where both states stand equally and can fully coexist in full enjoyment of their desires for peace, security, in cooperation, and in harmony. We reiterate our fraternal solidarity with the government and people of Syria, defending its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and its struggle against foreign aggression and international terrorism. An end must be put to all aggression against the people and government of Syria. We ratify our unwavering will to continue supporting the just fight of the Saudi people for self-determination and the respect of its dignity and its right to exist as a sovereign nation as a democratic Arab Saudi Republic. Nicaragua stands for the decolonization, the full decolonization of our continent, including the people of Puerto Rico and the restitution of sovereignty to the Malvina Islands to the Republic of Argentina. Our people and government support putting an end to all sanctions on the sister Republic of Iran, and we support the full implementation of the Joint Action Plan, JCPOA, of the 14th of July, 2015. We underscore that this agreement clearly shows that dialogue and diplomacy are the most appropriate means of achieving a peaceful settlement and are essential to the proper functioning of multilateralism. Given this pandemic, it becomes absolutely vital for humanitarian reasons to implement the universal principle so that Taiwan may participate in mechanisms and meetings of the United Nations system. We condemn the North American hegemonic aggressive policies which undermine the peaceful settlement of conflicts and which are a threat, as well as political action, economic, commercial, and military action against the Federation of Russia, the People's Republic of China, and the DPRK. We must defend the principle of dialogue and negotiation, the non-use of force, or the threat of the use of force, as principles enshrined in the United Nations Charter. We support the Federation of Russia in its efforts to promote peace and understanding and stability throughout the world. In keeping with international law, it's important to respect in Belarus the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. We reject all foreign intervention as well as external pressure brought to bear on the government or people. The Government of Reconciliation and National Unity stands firm and committed to the preservation of peace, stability, and security in Nicaragua, making every effort and developing policies to guarantee prosperity for all Nicaraguan people with inclusion and without distinction. In the international arena, this aspiration is reflected in our efforts to continue building relations which are based on respect, equality, solidarity, and mutual cooperation, all of which is in keeping with the multilateral, multipolar spirit of the United Nations Charter. The government of Nicaragua, and with the Nicaraguan people first and foremost, has developed economic and social policies for women and young people, for indigenous peoples, Afro-descendants, farmers, senior citizens, persons with disabilities, as an expression of Nicaraguan reality of the President people. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, we would reiterate that Nicaragua continues to be an important factor for stability, peace, and security at the regional and international level, with positive indicators in economic, political, and social development. Also, in the area of gender equality, citizen security, and in the area of eradication of poverty, which is unavoidable if we wish to create cultures of peace and human development. In our blessed Nicaragua, motherland of General Sandino and of the poet Rubén Darío, we say to the international community, we respect all peoples, all governments, all countries of the world. We respect international law, the United Nations Charter, the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states, and we demand equal respect for our Nicaragua, which stands free, independent, sovereign, and which enjoys self-determination. With this constitutional spirit in mind, which is also sovereign and patriotic, in Nicaragua on the first Sunday of November of this year, the Nicaraguan people will elect our authorities with the participation based on gender equality of 15 political parties between national and regional parties. And these include the participation, the Constitutional Liberal Party, the Sandinista National Liberation Front, headed by the FSLN partnership, and includes the following parties: the Nicaraguan Resistance Party, the Christian Unity Party, Alternative for Change, the Nationalist Liberal Party, the Japti Tazba Mazraka Rani Nani Movement, the Multi-Ethnic Indigenous Party, the Liberal Autonomous Party, and Mosiquita Pawanka. And finally, the Nicaraguan Christian Path, the Japti Tazaba Masakra in indigenous language, the Nicaraguan Liberal Alliance Party, the Alliance for the Republic, and the Independent Liberal Party. It is not the North American imperial power that elects in Nicaragua. It is the Nicaraguan people who vote, ratifying their commitment to continue working for peace, security, and the tranquility of people, family, and communities, faithful to our principles and values: patriotism, solidarity, service, unity, and gender equality. We stand prepared to harvest victories of love for Nicaragua, bringing international peace and security on our path towards a better world, one that is more fair and more human. Thank you very much.
We've been watching live the statements of the Foreign Minister of Nicaragua, Denis Moncada, as part of the high-level debate of the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The Nicaraguan Foreign Minister called for a new international model based on respect, human rights, peace, development and security for all. He stressed that the international community must stand together to face the challenges posed to humanity. The Foreign Minister denounced the Western interference in the internal affairs of other nations and unilateral coercive policies which disregard international law and the rights of all peoples to self-determination. We will, of course, continue to keep you updated with all the events at the United Nations as the 76th session continues. For teleSUR English, I'm Katrina Goss, and thank you for watching.